Did you know some of the cartoons your grandparents watched were so ugly that networks locked them in a vault and threw away the key? Not for scary monsters, for hate, for blackface, for a hero who smoked, for dead bodies drawn so plainly that kids laughed. The 1960s hid its darkest cartoons on purpose. Today we drag them back into the light, and you decide who went too far. Number 19. Gigantor. Gigantor came to American television in 1964, and on the surface, it looked like clean fun. A 12-year-old boy named Jimmy Sparks holds a small remote control box, and a giant steel robot with a rocket on its back flies in to smash the bad guys. Kids loved it. What most of them never learned is where that robot came from. In Japan, the show was called Iron Man No. 28, and the original story was born in the ashes of a war. A dying scientist tells his young son about a secret weapon he built, the 28th in a line of failed war machines meant to save a losing empire. That is the robot Jimmy controls. The famous opening in Japan shows the father on his deathbed passing the weapon to his boy. When the show crossed the ocean, the American team wiped all of that away. They cut the father's death. They erased the war setting and pushed the story into the far future year of 2000. They toned down the robot crushing men and machines because there was too much killing for young eyes. Jimmy himself was no innocent bystander either, since in many episodes the boy carried a gun and used it. Only 52 episodes were ever cleaned up enough to air, and the rest stayed in Japan. So the cheerful robot cartoon that kids sang along to was really a war weapon story in disguise, scrubbed hard so nobody would ask what Jimmy was truly holding in his little hands. Number 18. Roger Ramjet. Roger Ramjet started on American television in 1965, and at first, it seems harmless and even patriotic. Roger is a brave, dim, flag-waving hero who leads a squad of 4 kids called the American Eagles. Every few minutes he saves the whole world from spies and mad villains. But Roger has a secret helper, and it is not courage, it is a pill. When trouble hits, Roger swallows a proton energy pill, and for 20 seconds he gains the strength of 20 atom bombs. Then the power fades, and he needs another one. Watch closely, and the joke gets darker. The pills are shaped like capsules. He keeps them in a case, and he cannot win a fight without them. The show even had a jingle warning crooks to fear the pills. Here is the part that raised eyebrows for years. The nickname for the pills was PEP, and PEP pill was common slang at the time for amphetamines, the same speed that adults were quietly hooked on. So the smiling hero was, in plain sight, a superhero who could only work while popping stimulants. Many people believe this drug angle is a big reason the show was rarely picked up for reruns and stayed hard to find for decades. Roger Ramjet was clever, fast, and full of grown-up jokes hidden under a coat of kid-friendly paint, and its pill-popping hero remains one of the strangest role models ever aimed at children. Number 17. Eighth Man. In 1965, a robot hero named Eighth Man landed on American screens, and he had one habit no cartoon hero would be allowed to have today. He smoked. The story starts with a grim scene. A police detective is murdered by criminals, run down and left for dead. A scientist finds the body and pours the dead man's mind into a metal android. Now the detective lives again as Eighth Man, so named because he was the 8th try and the first that worked. He can run faster than a jet, and he can change his face to look like anyone. But his robot brain runs hot, and to cool it and recharge his power, he pulls out what looks exactly like a cigarette, lights up, and takes a few drags. Then he flies back into the fight. Picture a hero facing a firing squad who stops to smoke, and you understand why parents later shook their heads. At the time, nobody blinked, because many people still thought cigarettes were healthy. But as the world learned that smoking causes cancer, a crime fighter who recharged by lighting up became impossible to defend. The show quietly slipped off the air by the early 1970s and was never brought back for American children. And the smoking is the main reason no network wanted to touch a revival. A hero built from a dead man's memories, kept alive by cigarettes, remains one of the eeriest ideas ever sold to kids. Number 16. The Flintstones. The Flintstones ran from 1960 to 1966 and became the most famous cartoon family in the world. Fred and Wilma, Barney and Betty, a Stone Age town full of dinosaur gadgets. It felt about as safe as television could get. Yet a handful of episodes were later pulled from the rerun lineup, and the reasons say a lot about what slipped through in the early 1960s. One episode built its comedy around a jealous Fred and a self-defense teacher, drawn as a crude Asian stereotype. And when the show returned on later channels, that episode was quietly dropped. Another leaned on the tired idea of a hot-tempered husband and treated a wife being roughed up as a punchline, and it was taken out of syndication for showing that abuse as a joke. A third episode was banned up in Canada for the way it drew Native American characters. None of this was rare for the time, and that is the point. A wholesome family favorite that millions still love was hiding a few installments that networks decided modern families should not see. The producers themselves later admitted they thought it was fine to poke fun at certain groups. So the next time someone calls the good old days gentle and clean, remember that even Bedrock had episodes locked in a drawer, cut out so carefully that most fans never knew they were missing at all. For a cartoon sold as fun for the whole family, that quiet cleanup says a lot about the jokes networks once waved through, without a second thought. Number 15. Tom and Jerry. Tom and Jerry is one of the most beloved cartoon pairs ever made. A cat and mouse who chase each other through years of gags. But if you watch the older shorts on television today, you are not seeing what first hit the screen. For years, the cat and mouse shared a house with a heavyset maid named Mammy Two Shoes. The audience almost never saw her face. The camera stayed low, showing her from the waist down as she stomped after the wrecking cat. She was drawn and voiced as a broad stereotype of a black woman, and by the 1960s, that portrayal had become an embarrassment. So the studio did something strange. They went back and redrew her. Her legs were repainted to look like those of a white woman, and her voice was replaced with an Irish accent, because the makers figured poking fun at the Irish was safer. There was another running gag that got scrubbed too. When a character got hit by a blast or a car, the smoke would clear to reveal a face in blackface. Those moments were cut from countless shorts. So the Tom and Jerry that plays for kids now is a cleaned-up copy, quietly patched to hide a maid who was painted over, and jokes that were snipped away, all so nobody would ask what the original really looked like. It is one of the biggest cartoons on Earth, hiding edits in plain sight. Number 14. Speed Racer. Speed Racer roared onto American television in 1967, and for a kid's cartoon it was shockingly brutal. The hero is a young driver named Speed, who races his powerful white car, the Mach 5, against cheaters and killers. His girlfriend Trixie, his little brother, a pet chimp, and his mysterious masked brother all get pulled into danger. That sounds normal enough. The problem was the violence. This was Japanese animation built with far more blood and death than American cartoons allowed. And even after editors tried to soften it, plenty slipped through. Cars did not just crash, they exploded with drivers inside. Villains were shot, run off cliffs, and left for dead. Fists and guns filled the screen. The American team cut what they could and rewrote dialogue to cover up deaths, changing lines so a killed man became someone who merely went away. Even so, viewers at the time were stunned that a show aimed at children showed people dying right on the screen. One notorious kind of scene had rival racers meet fiery, fatal wrecks while Speed watched helplessly. For mid-1960s American television, that was almost unheard of. Speed Racer became a beloved classic anyway, remembered for its wild theme song and that unforgettable car. But underneath the fun, it was one of the most violent things a child could watch after school. A racing show, where losing a race often meant losing your life. Sanitized, just enough to sneak past the censors and into living rooms. Number 13. Johnny Quest. Johnny Quest first aired in 1964 and looked like a dream for adventure-loving kids. Johnny is an 11-year-old boy who travels the world with his scientist father, his adopted brother Hadji, a tough bodyguard named Race Bannon, and a bulldog. They fight mad villains, monsters, and mummies in far-off places. It was smarter and better drawn than most cartoons of its day. It was also, by many accounts, the most violent program on all of network television. The opening credits alone are packed with so much gunfire that you cannot count the shots. Machine guns blazing, rifles firing, ray guns blasting, men crushed under a speedboat. Inside the episodes, enemies were punched, shot, and killed on screen, and villains kept deadly creatures like Komodo dragons that hunted the heroes. A group called Action for Children's Television singled the show out as one of the most violent things a child could watch, and pressure built to clean up Saturday mornings. When Johnny Quest came back in later reruns, it was edited and cut to remove some of the harshest moments. On top of the violence, the show leaned on ugly foreign stereotypes for many of its villains, the kind of thing that aged badly. So a series many people remember with love was also a flashpoint, a gorgeous cartoon so packed with shooting and death that it helped spark the whole fight over how brutal children's television was allowed to be. Some scenes were so tense and grisly that they gave a whole generation of children nightmares long after the credits rolled. Number 12. Kimba the White Lion. Kimba the White Lion reached America in 1966 and was sold as a sweet story about a brave little white lion cub. Beneath the cute art, it was one of the darkest cartoons a child could stumble onto. The very first episode opens with death. Kimba's father is killed by a human hunter, and his mother dies too, leaving the cub alone before the story has barely begun. From there, it only gets heavier. One infamous episode shows a mass killing of elephants so over the top that fans still talk about it, with the hero later trying to explain away the slaughter. In the original show, Kimba keeps his dead father's skin as a keepsake and talks to it as if it were still alive, and the hide looks unsettlingly like a corpse. The American team knew all this was too grim, so they tried to hide the deaths in the dubbing. The trouble was that the drawings still clearly showed dead bodies. It got so obvious that kids made a game of it. Every time a plainly dead character lay on the ground, the dialogue would claim the character was only resting, and children learned to chant along, saying that the body was just lying there to rest a moment. So a show about a gentle lion who dreamed of peace was stuffed with death, grief, and a talking corpse, cleaned up so clumsily that its youngest viewers could see right through the trick. Number 11. Astro Boy was too dark for America. Astro Boy arrived in 1963 and became the first Japanese cartoon to win over American kids. A brilliant scientist loses his young son in a car crash, and out of grief, he builds a robot boy to replace him. But the robot cannot grow up, so the heartbroken father rejects him and sells him to a circus. That is how the story begins, with a grieving man throwing away his robot child. From there, the show carried a sadness most cartoons never touched. It was so gloomy that when it faded from American television, people blamed its depressing themes and its black and white gloom. The people who brought it over had to fight the darkness at every turn. One Japanese episode showed a surgery being performed on a dog, and the American network refused to air it at all, finding it too intense for children. The creator was baffled, since Americans hunted animals for sport, yet a cartoon operation was somehow a step too far. And then there is the ending. In the final story, Astro flies straight into the sun to save the Earth, sacrificing himself in a blaze. A hero built from a dead child, rejected by his own father, who dies flying into a star. That is not the tidy, happy cartoon most people picture when they hear the name. Astro Boy was a beautiful, heartbreaking show, and parts of it were simply too bleak for American television to show. Number 10. The Lost Astro Boy episode. Not every Astro Boy episode survived, and the story of the most famous missing one is deeply unsettling. To give his overworked staff a short break, the creator handed one episode off to an outside studio run by younger artists. In Japan, it was known by a swamp name, and in the American dub, it carried the title, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. The plot sent Astro to investigate sightings of dinosaurs in a lonely marsh. When the finished film came back, the creator was horrified. The animation was rough and broken. Astro's own face changed shape from shot to shot, warping wildly because each artist drew him differently. It looked nothing like his careful, polished show. He was so ashamed of it that he ordered the film destroyed. But there was a catch. He allowed it to air first on Japanese television, and a copy was also shipped to America for dubbing. So the very thing he wanted erased went out to the public anyway, before it could be wiped. For years, it counted among the episodes lost to time, spoken about but rarely seen. An ugly duckling the creator had tried to bury with his own hands. Later it turned up again and was studied for its strange, off-model look. It stands as a rare case where a cartoon fell so far below its maker's standards that he wanted every trace of it gone. A hidden black sheep in the family of a beloved classic that almost vanished forever. Number 9. Bugs Bunny. Nips the Nips. Bugs Bunny is the most famous cartoon rabbit on Earth, but one of his shorts has been locked away for good, and its studio has no plans to let you see it. Made in 1944 during the war, it is a piece of propaganda built to make audiences hate the enemy. Bugs floats across the Pacific in a crate and washes up on an island crawling with Japanese soldiers, who are drawn as cruel, buck-toothed cartoons meant to insult and dehumanize. Across the short, Bugs taunts them with vicious slurs and tricks them to their doom. In the scene people remember most, Bugs drives up like an ice cream man and hands the soldiers treats that are secretly hand grenades, calling them ugly names as he serves them, and the island fills with explosions. It was made to sell a war, and by later years it was impossible to defend. The film is not even one of the officially banned group of shorts, yet the studio still pulled it from circulation on its own. When it slipped onto a home video set in the 1990s, Japanese-American groups protested, and the copies were recalled, destroyed, and swapped for a different cartoon. Today, it remains one of a small number of Bugs Bunny shorts that appear on no official release. A cheerful rabbit most people link with childhood laughter also starred in a hateful wartime film that his own studio decided the world was better off never seeing. Number 8. Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land. Deep in the buried group sits the oldest one of all, a 1931 short called Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land. It stands apart from the rest for a few reasons. It is the only one made in black and white, the only one from the old Harmon and Ising studio, and it stars a forgotten early character named Piggy instead of the famous stars. It is also one of the strangest. The cartoon takes place around a riverboat where black characters are drawn as crude, shuffling caricatures playing music, and it even includes a dog, literally named Uncle Tom, a nod to the old stereotype of the meek, servile black man. Then the film takes a spooky turn and borrows a dancing skeleton scene straight out of an early Disney short, filling the screen with rattling bones. For a cartoon meant to entertain children, that blend of mocking racial caricature and creeping graveyard horror feels like a bad dream. It was pulled from television in 1968 with 10 others, because those stereotypes were ruled too offensive to air. Because it is so old and so plainly hurtful, the studio has kept it off its normal home video sets for decades, and most people have never seen a single frame of it. It survives as the grandfather of the buried cartoons, a black and white oddity so dated and so grim that the industry quietly erased it from the airwaves and left it to rot in the vault. Number 7. Goldilocks and the Jiven Bears. Among the buried cartoons is a swing music twist on a fairy tale from 1944 called Goldilocks and the Jiven Bears. It takes the old story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears and mashes it together with Little Red Riding Hood, then sets the whole thing to hot jazz and jive dancing. That part sounds like harmless fun. The reason it was locked away is the way it draws its characters, leaning on broad, mocking caricatures of black people that were common in that era and are painful to watch now. This one carries a small piece of trivia that sets it apart from the rest of the band group. It is the only cartoon on the list that was not made under the famous producer who oversaw most of the studio's wild wartime shorts, which makes it a bit of an odd one out even among the outcasts. Like the others, it was yanked from television in 1968 and has been kept off official collections ever since. The music is lively and the animation is skilled, which is part of what makes these buried shorts so tricky. They were often made by hugely talented artists at the top of their craft, and then aimed that craft at jokes that treated a whole group of people as a punchline. So a jazzed-up fairy tale that might have been a fun oddity instead became one more cartoon the studio decided no child should stumble across, hidden away, and left off the shelf for good. Number 6. Tin Pan Alley Cats. Made in 1943, Tin Pan Alley Cats comes from Bob Clampett, one of the wildest directors in cartoon history, and it is a jazz fever dream. The story follows a cat who wanders into a swinging nightclub full of music and dancing, then gets pulled into a bizarre trip through a strange, chaotic world before tumbling back out. On its own, the animation is bold and inventive, bursting with energy, and much of it was lifted from one of Clampett's most admired shorts. But the club and its patrons are drawn as heavy caricatures of black jazz musicians and dancers, including a figure meant to poke fun at a real and famous performer of the day. Those images are exactly why the short was later swept up and buried with 10 others. The director himself insisted for the rest of his life that he never meant any insult, saying the cartoon was a loving nod to great jazz and that everyone laughed along when it first came out. He blamed the anger on changing attitudes as the years passed. Whatever the intent, the studio decided the caricatures could no longer air, and the film was pulled from television in 1968 and kept off store shelves. Today, it survives mostly as a curiosity for animation students, admired for its dazzling, dreamlike style, and shunned for its ugly images at the very same time. It is a perfect example of the buried cartoon's hardest problem: brilliant craft and cruel caricature, stitched together so tightly that the studio chose to hide the whole thing. Number 5. Angel Puss. Angel Puss, from 1944, holds a strange record. Out of the whole group of buried cartoons, it is the only true Looney Tunes entry, and the only one directed by Chuck Jones, the legend behind so many beloved characters. That alone makes it a curiosity. The story is grim from the start. A young black boy is paid to take a cat down to the river and drown it, sack and all. The cat, of course, is too clever for that, and it escapes and then torments the boy by pretending to be its own ghost come back to haunt him. covering itself in white to play the part of a spooky spirit. The whole cartoon is built on a mocking caricature of the child, the kind of cruel stereotype that was common in that era and is hard to sit through today. That is why it was pulled from television in 1968 and shut away with the rest. What makes it sting is the name attached to it. Chuck Jones went on to create some of the most gentle and clever cartoons ever made, and yet early in his career his name sits on one of the buried shorts, a film many call his lowest point. It shows how deeply these stereotypes ran through the whole industry, touching even the artists we most admire. Angel Puss is rarely seen now, hidden from the friendly collections, a dark and mean-spirited footnote in the story of a director the world otherwise remembers with real warmth. Number 4. The Isle of Pingo Pongo. Made in 1938, this short is the only one in the buried group to feature Elmer Fudd, though he appears in an early form, and the film plays out as a fake travel movie rather than a normal cartoon chase. A narrator guides the audience on a tour to a made-up tropical island, and the whole thing is a string of gags about the trip. The reason it was locked away is the island itself and the people who live there. The natives are drawn as simple-minded savages and cannibals, a grotesque and insulting picture of island and African peoples that fit the ugly humor of its time. The short marches through one demeaning joke after another, treating a whole culture as nothing but a punchline for a laughing audience back home. Because of those images, it was swept up with 10 other cartoons and pulled from American television in 1968. Then kept off the official home video sets that carry the safe classics. Travel spoof cartoons like this were popular in that era, sending famous characters to exotic places, but the humor almost always came at the expense of whoever lived there. This one is remembered as one of the clearest examples. Under the jokes and the jaunty narration sits a cruel view of the world, and the studio decided long ago that modern audiences had no need to see it. So Elmer Fudd's strange island holiday sits in the vault beside the others, a buried postcard from a time the studio would rather forget. Number 3. All This and Rabbit Stew. This 1941 short carries a heavy distinction. It is the only Bugs Bunny cartoon in the whole buried group, which means the most famous rabbit alive has a hidden film the studio will not put on its collections. The setup is a familiar Bugs formula with a poisonous twist. Instead of being chased by the usual hunter, Bugs is pursued through the woods by a hunter drawn as a lazy, slow-witted, shuffling black caricature, the kind of mocking figure that minstrel shows had pushed for a century. Bugs runs rings around him, just as he always outsmarts his enemies. But the joke here rests entirely on the ugly way the hunter is drawn, and how dim he is made to seem. That is why the cartoon was pulled from television in 1968, along with 10 others, and has been kept off the shelves ever since. It is one of only a handful of Bugs shorts that appear on no official set at all. What stings is how ordinary it is otherwise. Swap the hunter for the usual bumbling human, and it is just another Bugs chase. But the studio built the entire comedy around a racist portrayal, and there is no clean way to edit that out. So a rabbit who has starred in thousands of hours of family-friendly fun also headlines a buried short that his own studio has quietly locked away, hidden from the very fans who think they have seen everything Bugs ever did. Number 2. The Great Cartoon Burial of 1968. Now for the moment that ties all these buried cartoons together, and it happened in the heart of the 1960s. In 1968, the company that owned a big library of old Warner Brothers cartoons made a hard choice. It gathered up 11 shorts made between 1931 and 1944. Cartoons stuffed with cruel black stereotypes and blackface gags, and it pulled every one of them from television. This group became known as the Censored 11. They were not merely edited or trimmed. They were removed whole, blocked from airing, and treated as too offensive for the changing country outside. And the ban did not fade. Every company that later owned the cartoons kept the vault sealed, promising again and again to leave the 11 off the air and off the store shelves. For decades, they were almost impossible to see through any legal path. There was one rare exception. In 2010, 8 of the 11 were shown once at a film festival, presented with careful context so audiences could understand the history behind them. Beyond that single event, they stayed hidden, and a planned home video release was later shelved. So when people picture the gentle old days of cartoons, the truth is that the industry itself decided some of its own films were so hateful that they had to be erased. The Great Burial of 1968 is the real answer to why certain cartoons vanished. A deliberate choice to lock away 11 shorts and throw away the key. Number 1. Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs. At the very top sits the most infamous buried cartoon of all, made in 1943. It is a wild, fast, jazz-filled spin on Snow White, retitled with a mocking name and populated entirely by heavy black caricatures. The story follows the shape of the fairy tale: a beautiful heroine, a jealous queen, a poison plot, and a crew of tiny helpers. But every character is drawn as a broad, painful stereotype, set to swing music and gunfire. The director insisted he made it as a real tribute to black performers, and the cast of an all-black stage show did lend their voices and enjoy the work. Yet the images are so extreme that the film became the face of the whole Buried group. It was one of the 11 cartoons pulled from television in 1968, and the studio has guarded it more tightly than almost any cartoon in history. It has never appeared on a normal home video set. For decades, the only way to see it was through bootleg copies passed around in the shadows. In 2010, it was screened a single time at a festival, restored and shown with heavy context, and then it went right back into the vault. Film historians argue about it endlessly, some calling it a dazzling piece of animation, and others calling it unforgivable, and often both at once. It is the Buried cartoon above all others, a short so loaded that the industry chose to lock it away, and has kept that promise for more than 50 years. So there it is, a pile of cartoons the networks hoped you would never find, from smoking robots to films locked in a vault forever. Here is the hard question. Should these Buried cartoons stay hidden so they cannot hurt anyone? Or should they be shown with honest context so we never forget how they were made? Tell me in the comments where you draw the line and who you think went too far.